Jay Campbell.
There's no secret. There's no shortcut. Everything that is alive is conscious. Be silent, be still, and know God. Until you feel worthy, it ain't gonna happen. Rigorous, ruthless, disciplined focus. You have to get to a place where you can work on yourself. If you are looking to live at the tip of the spear when it comes to health optimization, join my private membership group, fullyoptimizedhealth.com, and get the latest and greatest on hormone optimization, peptides, fitness, fat loss, and most importantly, raising your vibration. Again, go over to fullyoptimizedhealth.com and sign up today. Hey guys and gals, this is Jay Campbell, and I'm very excited today to be joined in my virtual StreamYard studio with the one and only Laura Knight-Jadczyk. And of course, my good friend, Hunter Williams. Laura, it is an honor to have you here today. How are you?
I'm fine, and I hope y'all are fine over there. I bet it's warmer there than it's here.
They are spraying the skies, Laura, so bad in South Florida nowadays that it's a random day when you actually see the sunshine.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's insane. We did have a week of sunshine uninhibited about 10 days ago, but since then it's just, if there's a glint of it in the morning, the planes are quickly in the sky spraying whatever it is they're spraying, and then it's gone. And Hunter's in North Carolina. What's it like up there right now, brother?
It's a little cold, a little rainy. Kind of looks like a January day here in March, but it's been nice this past week, so a lot of sunshine and everything. So I'll take it.
Cool.
And not too bad.
Laura is in the countryside of France, correct, Laura?
Yeah. Middle of the apple and kiwi fields.
In the middle of the apple and kiwi fields. Amazing. So I'll just do a quick short introduction. So Laura has volunteered to spend time with us in a series of podcasts.
I didn't
really covering.
Coerced me.
Yeah, she's been coerced.
We're holding you against your will.
She's been forced by us to do who knows how many episodes / podcast / series of covering really her books, a little bit of her life, her story, and I would say probably, how it correlates and winds into today and whatever today is in March of 2024 and where we're going. Why don't you just, I think for a little bit, just, to talk about the books, and again, I know you have a lot of books, but the Wave series, maybe just kind of summarize at a high level why you wrote those books.
Why I wrote those books. Okay. That's, I don't know whether I need to see or not. Yeah. Back in the day, early days of the internet, 92 and 93. And, you get an account, you have the internet, you have Alta Vista, you have, that's your search engine, and you have, what was it called? It was that website. Does anybody remember what it was?
CompuServe or AOL?
AOL. Yeah, AOL. And then the only way you could get into some discussions on AOL, but they weren't very satisfactory because of the way the software was working. But, you get on email lists, different people, and talk about things. And so I was on several email lists, and I was on the AOL chats about UFOs and aliens. And yeah. And the thing was my background was that I had been reading and researching the paranormal since I was probably 13 years old. And that was the age I was when there was an old man, my brother cut his grass. He lived in a town called Arapika. Did you ever hear it? So up north of Hudson, which is north of Newport Richey, which is north of Tampa.
I'm vaguely familiar ever since I talked to you about that, but not originally until I talked to you.
It's the town time forgot. It still is.
Right.
But anyway, so he lived up there, and my brother would go cut his grass for him. And my mother he was an old man, so my mother made some meals to take over to him, and I went with her, and he had this incredible library. And he had inherited it from his mother, who had been a member of the Society for Psychical Research
Wow.
in England. So they had all of the proceedings. And so he allowed me to, borrow these books and read them. And so I read them, and they had books about shamans and books about, Hawaiian shamanic magic type thing, kahunas and that sort of thing. And that was really what got me started at 13 years old. And, it just kept off for then. And then when I was in college, I took a seminar in learning to do hypnotherapy. And so I started doing hypnotherapy. And of course, when you're in college, everybody wants to be hypnotized, tell me, and so we were doing, my girlfriend and two girlfriends and myself, we were doing a lot of hypnosis, just about anybody that, asked us to. And we were doing past life regressions because I was continuing to reading all the Edgar Casey stuff and all about people that, things like the Freddie Murphy and past lives and so forth. So, I didn't know whether I believed it or not, but I was going to play with it anyway. And I had some really remarkable experiences doing these hypnotherapy sessions. And, going on and on. And then, of course, as I got older and I continued to read and research, I got into biblical research back in 1985 when I had my fourth child, because I was bedridden and I couldn't do anything else. And I was also subscribed to the Edgar Casey Library in Virginia Beach, library by mail. This was before the internet. So they would send you a stack of books and you'd read them and then you'd send them back. And, so I just kept going and going and going, and I kept copious notes. And I have boxes full of notebooks that are full of these notes. But when I would write notes, I would write something about what I was reading, but then the things would start coming in my head and I would start, my brain would be reacting to it. Or I didn't even know if it was my brain or if it was something else, but I was reacting to it like, that doesn't sound quite right. What about this, etc. And I still do that when I write notes. So I had this, and I would continue doing hypnotherapy, off and on during the years. And then at one point I worked with a psychologist. I was working for the state of Florida in the welfare office. And I also, what happened, I had a lot of stress. So I went to a psychologist to see if I could control my stress, because the doctor told me he couldn't give me any more shots of cortisone. So I went to the psychologist and we got to talking and so forth, and he found out my interest in hypnotherapy, and he was going to hypnotize me. Well, I can't be hypnotized. Anyway, so he said, well, you're really good, because, I tried working on him and he was really good, would you mind working with some of my patients, especially women, who didn't want to be hypnotized by a man. And I said, yes. So I did that. And then there was some other strange, odd cases that would come along. Somebody would just hear that I did it, and they would just, say, my cousin needs help. Would you help him out? So I would do that. Proceeding on, so along comes the whole New Age movement. And channeling's a big thing. So naturally, I had to read everything about that. I mean, we have probably, 25,000 books in this house. I've got a 75-foot hallway. It's lined with bookcases. And then I have bookcases downstairs in the studio. I've got bookcases at the top of the stair. I've got stashed everywhere.
Did you bring your books with you from the States?
Yes, I did.
That's awesome.
And if I go anywhere else, that's the main thing I'm going to take.
Right.
My books and the piano. So, uh, I just, yeah, I had a lot of experience, and I graduated at a certain point to doing more than just ordinary hypnotherapy because I ended up doing some exorcisms. And I mean, a number of them. And that was because, I came across some unusual things in some hypnotherapy cases that were really troubling. But I don't want to get into all that detail. But the point is that I had this years and years and years of experience and reading and dealing with actually evil. Because when you deal with an exorcism, and in some cases it really is an exorcism.
Right.
Most cases it's just detaching a dead dude who you know didn't know what to do after he died, and you just help him along on his way. Basically, it was like psychologically counseling, uh, you know, somebody who's in the afterlife. And I mean, if you encounter some attachment with some person, and they're there because, well, I died as a result of rape, and I never got a chance to confess, and therefore, I'm a sinner, and I can't go to heaven. I mean, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you basically take them through a whole theology lesson and explain to them, why God wouldn't be condemning them because you don't want to just tell them there isn't, God the way they think of it. So yeah, and I had this lot of experience, and I could see I developed really good nose for bullshit and evil. And I'll tell you, there was one exorcism I did. It took me 6 months to recover. I mean, literally. I mean, it was just like, you feel like you're psychologically, like your skin has been flayed off of you, and that all your meat is raw and exposed. Um, but yeah, the New Age movement and all of that sort of thing was coming along, and I was reading about it, reading all this channeling. And meanwhile, I'd been doing all this work in the background. And, the thing was during all of this time, I tried to understand what I was reading and experiencing and tried to formulate a theory to explain it. And the best theory I had ever come up with was, well, it's all mind. I mean, there's a case that Joel Whitten writes about in his book, and he's a Canadian psychiatrist, not a psychologist. And there was a case where he had a patient who would have these horrible uh, physiological effects at periodic intervals. And then she started, things started happening in her house. She had a dollhouse or something, and the dollhouse kept being covered with blood, and there would be blood on the walls and that sort of thing. Well, they took samples of it. It was human blood. So, but she, wasn't bleeding from any
Right.
place. And to make a long story short, he did a bunch of hypnotherapy with her and took her into past life experiences, and she had been killed apparently with her child. And if I'm not remembering this story exactly, that's all right. It's the point is still going to carry. In a past life, and that she had all this grief, and so that every at the age that she was when she died in the previous life is when this phenomena began in this life.
Wow.
And I don't remember exactly if it was like every month when she had her period, or if it was related to special events. I don't remember that exactly. But the thing was that once he processed her trauma, the phenomena stopped. And I mean, it's very similar to poltergeist phenomena, because that's always associated with sexually frustrated women, or, adolescents, or prepubescent or just pubescent young people, mostly female, but sometimes male. And so And then there was one famous poltergeist case. The young girl, I think she was in Miami. I think she ended up committing murder, and it was a real tragic situation. I don't remember her name right offhand, but the psychologist professor who worked on that case wrote a book about it. And he had the idea that there were all these emotional impulses and feelings and so forth in the body that would, generate and rise up, and that they would divert at the back of the neck somewhere. They wouldn't make it up to the brain where they could be dealt with. They would just randomly just shoot out, energy shooting out your neck, so to speak. So that's pretty interesting. And so my idea was that everything was mind. And in a sense, it is. But we still have to, we are not at the level yet where that makes any practical sense for us, nor is it of any practical use to say that we're all one, because we are not at that level yet.
Yes.
So I had the idea, it's all mind, and all this phenomena, it's all mind, and then the whole thing about the UFO thing came up, because then I started the channeling experiment. And we don't even like to call it channeling, because it's not even really channeling, because nobody is unconscious. Nobody is doing anything weird, we do it, full light, with a room full of people, everybody talking and chatting, and, it's not your usual, we just call it superluminal communication, because we're communicating with ourselves, and we'll come back to that, so don't get excited. So I had started the experiment, and the guy and the whole synchronous series of events that I even met this guy, but that's neither here nor there at the moment, because he started on UFOs and aliens. Says, what the heck? Like, that is where I drew my line. I had been researching the paranormal, and there was a lot of credible witnesses, and I read all of these, proceedings of the Psychical Research Society and scientific, talks about it, and articles and books written by doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists, people who had reputations, and I had a theory, but UFOs and aliens, and that was my line. Yeah. I mean, I could accept the paranormal. I could formulate a theory about it, that, kind of made sense. And I could deal with it, work with it, talk about it, but do not talk to me about UFOs and aliens. And that's all he wanted to talk about. So he talked. So anyway, to make a long story shorter, I ended up being bedridden. This happens to me frequently during my life. And he brought over a paper bag full, grocery bag, full of paperback books about UFOs and aliens. Yeah. So I picked one of them, and it happened to be Bud Hopkins' book. So I read Bud Hopkins, and I just think, oh, God. What the heck is going on? Because he sounded like he was a rational person, he didn't, I mean, my idea of somebody who's interested in UFOs, they had Coke bottle glasses, and they had Mad Magazine rolled up in their pocket,
Yeah.
plastic pen protector in their pocket, that sort of thing. That's the person who's interested in UFOs. And but Bud Hopkins was, he wrote a very interesting book. So there was a whole site full. So I ran through all of them, and I read. I said, wow. At the end of it, I said, the only thing I can say is that there's a whole heck of a lot of smoke. Is there a fire?
Right.
And then, no sooner had this little episode passed than, my daughter picked some numbers for her weekly lottery. It wasn't the big weekend one, but anyhow, we won about 35,000 on her pick. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to get us the swimming pools for the kids, and for me to have some therapy, because I need therapy. And by the way, these above ground swimming pools are great for aquatherapy. And we have a big in-ground spring-fed pool out back, but we also have we have our baby pool, my above-ground pool that I do my aqua gym. So I got this pool, and we got it all set up. And then the first night that we're going to get in the pool, and it was August 17th or 18th. And we're going to go and float in the pool and watch the Perseid meteor shower. And we're out there in the pool, Newport Richie, backyard. And all of a sudden, my kid says, "Wow, what is that? Look." And I turn around and I look, and there's this enormous black boomerang
Yeah.
sailing over the top of my house. I mean, utterly silent, really close. I don't think it was any higher than, I really don't think it was any higher than 150 feet from the ground. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just above the top of the house. If you'd been standing on the roof of the house, 2-story house, with a broom, you could have touched it.
Just FYI, I've seen them myself too in California, in Southern California, 3 times, and 1 time with my daughter. So me being with whatever that means.
Yeah, and it's if anything, you don't really hear anything, but you feel like a
Yes.
rumble.
Yes.
And you don't really see redness, but you perceive a dull red glow to the blackness of it. So I went over, and then a few minutes later, another one went over. And I mean, it was moving as slow as you could walk. I mean, really slow.
Mhm.
I mean, if I'd been jogging, I could have kept up with it.
Mhm.
And so that freaked me out. I was thinking something that size, that shape, they really need a little velocity to stay airborne.
Mhm.
And that was the first thing that occurred to me. Well, anyway, so my brain is working really, really hard to try to figure out what I just saw. And it fit into no category. So I decided what I saw must have been a flock of geese that were flying V formation really close together so that you couldn't see the sky between their bodies. That was
Right.
my,
Right.
that was what my brain came up.
All of your children saw it? Everyone that was in the backyard saw it too?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. And they remember it to this day. So the thing was that the next thing was there was another sighting up at Pine Island, which is north of Arapahoe, which is north of Hudson, north of Newport Richie, north of Tampa. You ought to check it out. It's a really nice place. There was a sighting there, which is, it's a long, lonely road that goes, I mean, it just runs on like a bank, through the marshes. And then it gets out to this little island-like place, which is like, it's a park now, but way back when it was just raw nature. And a family of 5 and a sheriff's deputy
Wow.
saw their clone. So there was an article in the newspaper, and then it turned out that the sheriff's deputy happened to be somebody I went to school with. When you live in a certain area, you know everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I just thought, that was really weird that came up. And then a little later, there was, I met a woman. The circumstances aren't really important. And we got to talking about hypnotherapy. And she says, well, something happened to me weird, however many years before. And I always wanted to know what happened. Do you think you could help me find out? And I says, well, sure, we can try. So she had an appointment. She was coming over, and it started to storm like crazy. And, sudden thunderstorms before, like this was a really, really wild one. And I thought, well, she won't come in this kind of weather, but she had started up from Spring Hill. It was a long way. So she was already part way to my house before it started raining. So she came on, and she came in and did this, did the hypnotherapy and so on and so forth. And the bizarre thing was I hadn't said anything to her about any aliens or abductions or anything like that. And here she started presenting me, questions and answers. I was asking questions. She was answering, presenting me with a classic missing time case, a la Betty and Barney Hill,
Right.
or some of the people in the Bud Hopkins books. And I said, "Wow, this is weird." And we got to the point where and I was taking her through it step by step. Okay, she pulled off the road because this big blue light was just like getting bigger and bigger. And so she pulled off the road, and I said, "Okay, what's happening now?" I'm sitting in my car. I says, "What's happening now?" She says, "There's somebody outside." I says, "What's happening now?" And then she started, really getting agitated and doing like this and carrying on. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she says, "It hurts. It hurts. It hurts." And I says, "What do you mean it hurts?" She says, "My hands, my arms are there, they hurt. They hurt." And so I backed her up and I started over again. Okay. Pulled off the side of the road in the car. You're sitting there. "What's happening now?" Oh, geez. I'm holding the steering wheel. And "What's happening now?" "There's something is outside." "What is it?" And then she starts hurting again. And so I tried a split screen technique, which, generally can get anybody to reveal anything, even if it's traumatic, because you take the person out of it being immediately in it. You suggest that they are looking at a movie or a TV screen or whatever, and they're seeing it happen to somebody else, even, to take them away from it so that the trauma doesn't bother them. And she couldn't even do it then. I never saw anything like that. I was getting the creeps. So I asked her, I says, "Why can't you tell me?" And she said, "They won't let me." Okay. Fast forward a couple of days, newspaper article, St. Times. There was a UFO sighting that night. And it just happened to be, we figured it out because the person who sighted it was in her house, and it was like 4 or 5 blocks down the way. And she was looking in the direction of, where I lived. And she described what she saw and the time she saw. And it turned out that what she saw was one of these big black boomerangs over my house at the exact time I was doing this hypnosis session with this
Wow.
woman. So, things were getting a little weird. And so I was involved in the AOL discussions, and I had, finally got the Cassiopaeans communication, and I was talking about that on AOL and on the several newsletter distributions. One of them was somebody, Colonel Stevens or somebody. He was very influential in the UFO community at the time. He's dead now. And I sent him some of the transcripts, and he sent me an email back privately, and he says, "I've never seen anything like this before." He says, this is the closest to what we know that I've ever seen." And I thought, "Oh, that's not comforting," because one of the
Why
things,
are they talking to me? Right.
some of the things that he say are not happy making.
Right.
And so I went on, and I realized that there was this big to-do about the Heaven's Gate cult and their mass suicide because they expected to be taken up with the Hale-Bopp comet or some nonsense like that. And the weird thing was on the days that happened before, starting from before it happened and lasting for probably 24 hours or something, we had a little website where we were putting up some of the material at that time. We started getting hit that just went off the chart. And probably 50% of them were from Boeing.
Wow. Yeah.
What the heck? So I don't know why Boeing, but that's what it was. And so, yeah, I realized that there are people that they're the New Agers that expect the aliens that are going to come save them, and they're they're just so wonderful, and they put me back in bed and pulled my blanket out and gave me my binky. I mean, they're, so they must love me. And well, whatever, there's stuff going. And and then I even did some hypnosis sessions with some new agey types, and they just, I've included some of those sessions excerpts, some of them fairly lengthy in the Wage series, so that
Yeah.
either, when I started getting some of that material, and I just, I realized that somebody needs to really put all this together and write about it and let people know that maybe it's not such a friendly phenomenon after all, because I mean, there are cow mutilations. So there was material going around about human mutilations. I don't know if you've looked at the human mutilation
Yeah.
material.
Yeah.
And there was information about, airplanes that disappeared. I think there was I don't know what all the detail was, but there were planes that disappeared and pilots that disappeared and, um, threatening acts that were made against military installations. And, a lot of it was covered up, but there, things came out. So I said, I really need to put this together because I would like to convince people that this is not, because one of the things we had learned from the seas was that it was a hyperdimensional phenomenon. And I said, all these people, they're looking for the UFO Cadillac to land on the White House lawn where they can walk up to it and kick its tires. And it's not going to happen that way. It isn't that way. And people that talk about, like, for example, the reptoids or the dracominoids or whatever you want to call them. We just call them Lizzies because it's easy,
Yeah.
and
In Florida, they're upright alligators.
yeah. And supposedly they are denizens of fourth density, not dimension, but density. And density is a concept that was brought up and dictated in great detail in the raw material,
Right.
which is
Right.
really, really good. I mean, you should really check. Sometimes it's hard to read, but it's worth it.
I have the whole black super feature set from like 10 years ago where they put them all together and glossed them.
Okay, well, then you should be reading them if you haven't already.
No, I have. It's great info in there, but you're right. It's very tedious at places.
It's extremely dense.
Yeah.
So I decided it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. And I started writing, and I wrote chapter almost every day.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking about getting up and starting at 7:00 in the morning. My kids brought me sandwiches and coffee to my desk, feed mom. And I would write until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And then I would get it done and I would put it up. Maybe the next day I had to go back and correct some errors because readers would send me, well, you misspelled this or you forgot, whatever.
When was this? This was in the early to mid 90s when you were writing these?
No, this is in 19. I think I was writing it in 99, 2000.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I was, I mean, I was writing it before 9/11. I mean,
Right.
because you don't see any reference to 9/11 in there. So I'm pretty sure it was finished before 9/11, before 2001. And of course, meanwhile, I had this, what do you call it, reporter and his photographer sidekick, camping out at my house half the time. I mean, for the amount of interviews they did, he only got 20 pages. I mean, they practically lived at my house for 2 or 3 years. Yeah, I had that going on in the background. And so I wrote The Wave, and I wrote it, in a state of almost frenzy. They talk about the old days of the oracles in Greece, and they would go and they would go into some kind of frenzy and pronounce. Well, I was practically in a frenzy because the kids couldn't even talk to me. I was just, and weird phenomena was happening all over the place. Thumps and bumps and bangs and things falling and toothpaste and toothbrushes appearing and disappearing, which is really annoying.
What did you feel like in that state? Because to me, I'm imagining you were kind of driven by spirit, your higher self, higher density, whatever you want to call it. Is that kind of the best way to liken it to?
Yeah, because I was definitely, driven. I was like, how would you say it was, hon? Well, when I was riding the wave, he said I was in a trance.
So that's what it would make. That's exactly how it would make sense, because if you're receiving, like you said, superluminal communication or downloads, that's the only way they would be able to get it to you, probably.
Yeah, by this time we'd been doing the seas for probably about 4, 5, 6 years, going, something like that. So at that point, it was like almost, I never could, and I still don't, to this day, know what they're going to say before they say it.
Mm-hmm.
And we spell it out with a planchette, and I write it out one letter at a time. So every bit of the communication is one letter. There's probably a million of them, but it was one at a time. And I never know, it bypasses my conscious mind. And it's usually a surprise. And if I think, well, they get a couple of letters going and I think I know what the word's going to be, because, it's like playing Jeopardy.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I know what it's going to be. And then it turns out to be something different. It always freaks me out, but they do that. So I thought, this is something has to be done to clarify this. And I wanted to present the dangers of the New Age movement, the dangers of UFOs and aliens, because they pose a clear and present danger to humanity. And I wanted to provide the evidence that I had collected, and that was quite a bit, that this was a hyperdimensional phenomenon. And if you're looking for something that's going to be solid 3D, and they came from, some planet, from some other star system, that may or may not be true, but they didn't come necessarily as 3-dimensional or third density individuals. So it's not a pleasant thing. And of course, the more I collected the data and the more I wrote, the more I understood that, what Charles Fort said is it's very true. We are property. And it's not a pleasant thing to think about. And so that is the whole thing behind the writing of the wave. It was written in a state, an altered state almost. And it went on for months. Obviously it went on a chapter a day. You figure out how many chapters there are. I might have taken a day off here and there, but not much. And I was driven, and no sooner did I get one page finished, as I was writing it, I knew what I had to write in the next one. So no sooner was one finished than, the next one was already writing itself in my head. So that's how you get the wave. And the wave is, in addition to the insights from the seas and whatever channeling I might have been doing on, during the writing, there is also a tremendous amount of information that has been extracted from an enormous number of books. And, there's stuff that there are insights that came from books that I didn't even quote from directly or mention. But, I read thousands and thousands. Yeah, I read once I had experience with this crazy damn UFO over my house, and I realized that clearly was not just something that, was an imagination. It wasn't imagination. I mean, incidentally, not long after that, my dog died. He got sick and died, and I was suffering from something that was similar to radiation poisoning. My kids were sick, had problems, so it wasn't a pleasant experience. So, yeah, I wanted to convey to people that the New Age movement is just a new version of snake oil sales.
The same old song and dance.
Yeah, it's snake oil, and most of it and is just useless if not downright dangerous. And that it is a hyperdimensional phenomenon, and to explain to people how this phenomenon affects them. I mean, this is not just something that happens to somebody over there. This is not just, some UFO and some aliens and some abductee. Everybody can be affected by this
Right.
because I wrote an article at one point called Aliens, Demons, and Vampires, something like that. And I was comparing the historical information about so-called demonic possession and vampires to what so-called aliens do.
Right.
And calling them aliens, well, they're alien to us but they're not necessarily from somewhere else or from another density.
Right.
It's completely different. I mean, those dimensions can be rolled up all around us, and one of the reasons why they don't come in and take us over is because they are fourth density, and they can't maintain themselves in our density for any length of time. Now, the Seas say that the men in black are reptilians. They're Lizzies that have been, transformed themselves into, human-like forms, and they, appear and they can maintain this for a limited period of time. But if you read all of the literature on men in black, they're really weird.
Have you? I know they are. Have you ever seen? I'm sure you have. But have you ever seen Dan Aykroyd's interview when he was approached by a man in black?
No.
It's pretty phenomenal. Assuming you believe Dan Aykroyd.
Does he talk about how they run down and they start stuttering because they're running out of gas or whatever?
Well, so this guy, one of them, again, if you believe Dan Aykroyd, and I find him credible. I mean, it's hard to find anyone in Hollywood credible, but the reality is that he seemingly is credible, especially in this interview. You can find it on YouTube. Let the crew look it up, watch it. But he says that they knocked on his door. And they were asking him, they asked him a bunch of questions.
Oh, yeah.
And it was bizarre. Like one of them didn't have like an earlobe, it was like missing. And then, it looked like he had white makeup all over, very translucent white skin. And he said it was just the most bizarre thing because as he was talking to them, he felt like he was in sort of a trance because he was like, he couldn't understand why he didn't feel balanced. So it was almost like, I guess, as you say in the books with the Cassiopaeans, information that it's like what do you call it, a window falling or something like that, where you're with another being from another higher density in your density. I don't know. Understanding the way I understand things now from your information, it makes a lot more sense now. That would actually be a really good video to queue up and to watch that interview with him again, because it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and there's a lot of literature on it. So, yeah. So hyperdimensional, that was the thing. And when I wrote the book Secret History, I also wanted to, that book was kind of like a dump. I dumped everything I had, pulled together up to that moment in that book because I was under so much attack at the time. I thought, well, they're going to kill me. They are going to kill me.
Do you know that, just so you know, Hunter and I read that book 2 years ago, Laura, and honestly, it blew our brains apart so much that we literally didn't know what to do with it. We were like,
well, it's funny because we actually said, I don't know if dump was the exact word, but we said we had felt like the same thing, that you had all this information and you just didn't have any outlet for it. So you got it in there, because I would read it and I would be fascinated. Then I would feel like I would jump around into the next thing. And it was so overwhelming. Now, I wish I had read The Wave before it, because
Right.
it makes so much more sense in
Right.
hindsight. But I don't even remember how we found the book. We were like, we got to read
No, we
this.
found it off of Amazon. We found it off of Amazon. I remember telling you, dude, it was a review. Somebody wrote a review and said, if you think this is interesting, you need to read LKJ's. So I was like, what? And then I
Well,
found it.
it was funny because she was the first person that talked about, and I don't want to get into like name calling or anything, but she was the first person that talked about Stephen Greer potentially being COINTELPRO. And Jay and I in private had talked about that for years because Jay had met him in person
Yeah.
and it felt that he had been replaced or something like that, something weird from where he had known him before to where he was. And
Show the
I
book.
remember,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Show the
Oh
book.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No, it's front of the book. It's so many highlighted sections in this book. It's a monster. It's a true Bible. Well, true story about Stephen Greer, just really quick, because I think it's fascinating.
I want to tell you the picture in just a second. Show the cover.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
sure.
you got to show the like right in the center because it's cutting. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, those are photographs I took in Osh Cathedral, which is about 50 kilometers over to the west of us. Yeah. Yeah. So I took those pictures and they're important for later reasons. But continue on, Hunter.
Well, so Greer, I went to a thing. I was fascinated by his work. This is a long time ago now. This is at the very beginning of his work, or not the beginning of his work, because we all know that he was supposed to have that thing before 9/11 happened, and it never happened. But this was around 2008 or 2009 in Southern California. And he was appearing at some speech in Glendale, and I lived in Pasadena. So at the time, my ex-wife Ann and I went to visit him, and I met with him. And this is a crazy story, but he locked himself out of his rental car in the underground parking garage where it was. And he was talking. He was like, "Oh my God, I can't get my keys." And I said, "You know what? I actually have a Slim Jim in my car. Let me go with you. We can get it out." And he was like, "Oh, would you?" And so I went with him, and we had this, 20, 25-minute conversation while we were Slim Jimming him. It ended up being it was one of those rental cars that you couldn't Slim Jim. And so he ended up calling, I ended up calling my AAA people, and they came out and got him in. But him and I were just having a conversation. And I would swear to you, he was such a good man. He was such a nice, humble, decent. And again, obviously, this is before I understood the hyperdimensional aspects of this as I do now. But it was just like, I could never think that he would be a COINTELPRO. And then now you look at the guy, and I just watched him do an interview. Hunter and I watched him do an interview with Billy Carson. And Billy's a good friend of mine, about a year ago. And we were like, this guy is gone. He's not even there. Like, who is that guy?
Well, the thing is that when you have, go back to the thing about what vampires can do.
Right.
They can control your mind. They can control the weather. They can control animals. They can change forms. They can pass through walls. They can walk up the side cliffs or walls or whatever. These are the abilities that have been described in terms of, alien visitors, so to speak.
Sure.
The part about controlling minds is really important. Count Dracula's guilt. Calm.
Right.
And they don't really have to even go to that extent because they can do it. They're invisible. They can be invisible and they can be controlling your mind. And I even had, some kind of like a flash of an image once, of some, lizard type being, sitting in front of a big console with, buttons and levers and dials and little camera images of all these people that he was in charge of controlling. And let me bump up his emotional state right now. Pushes the lever and the guy starts going ballistic. Let me throw a little sex spin on that. He's gonna have a sudden attraction to this person, or whatever. He's gonna punch somebody out, or he's gonna think that his wife is unfaithful, or he's gonna, and that they're this, and it's not that far from the truth.
It's not.
That's the scary thing, and that's why that's why getting acquainted with and controlling your own mind and your own emotions is like probably the first step to becoming free of this hyperdimensional control matrix.
Right.
That's the act of kind of like, taking the red pill. So, yeah. Anyway, carry on.
Well, I was going to
Go
say
ahead.
with Secret History of the World, and I thought this was cool in the Wave series too. So on the one hand, Jay and I have read a lot of quote unquote channeled work, and a lot of it is some good. You can look at like Barbara Marciniak and some of these things, and there's like probably truth with error. But what was cool about the Wave is, like you said, there was the channeled material, whatever you want to call it, but then there was also this concrete data that you would have thousands of footnotes per book that then you could go and look at and say, okay, this lines up. You know, for instance, you could look at I always mispronounce the name, but Gurdjieff or Moraveth, and go cite, okay, this was going on at this time in human consciousness. This is going on in this time. And there's a through line, even though we use maybe different like language concepts to describe it, that's going on. And then going back to like looking some of the highlights I have in Secret History of the World, it starts to make a lot more sense of trying to grab and understand, why has humanity been under this yoke for so long of like, I feel like 95% of people want to do the right thing. They just want to pay their bills and provide for their family. But why is there's this narrative of just human suffering and destruction for so long? Is it psychopaths? But then who's controlling the psychopaths? So it made a lot more sense after I read The Wave of like the through lines and secret history of why humanity seemed to be under this like yoke of manipulation and control for so long.
Yeah, it's a repeating syndrome, and by the way, it's probably more like 87%. And maybe even not that, because there's like 70% that are psychopaths, and they're surrounding minions or people with related pathologies that interact with them, and then you have like a bell curve, of people. The other 87% is a bell curve, and you divide it in half of them. And one side of them are the people that are going in, going the down path, and then the other side are going the up path. So, and there's even a worse problem about that, but we'll get into that later. So,
Yeah.
one of your questions actually would
My,
lead.
my head, I have so many. I mean, my head is exploding right now. This is so amazing. I'm so grateful that you're doing this. What do you think about just getting back into the channeling aspect? And I know what the C's have said. What about Dolores Cannon? Is that all nonsense?
Dolores Cannon. You want to give me a second here to
Yeah, of course.
pull up my C's transcript search engine? Dolores.
She seems like a good soul, but I was reading some of her books and I just told Hunter I would just throw the book on the ground and say, this is abject nonsense.
Well, here's the thing too, while Laura's looking that up, that now that I understand, anyone that knowingly or unknowingly says the alien phenomenon has any sort of benefit to humanity now,
Right. Can't be.
because again, you interchange the word alien with vampire, with demon. It's a modern construct of the same language that's been used. And so I would say anyone that would quote unquote call that friendly and benevolent, and then
Right.
also too, will create an external savior complex around these
The
beings
Space
that are coming
Brothers.
to save
Yeah.
people. Yeah, exactly. Even if there's some truth in there that would resonate, it probably more or less is used
It
as,
seems like it's COINTELPRO to the hilt,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay, I didn't have anything on Dolores, so I didn't find anything. I don't think we ever mentioned her, but I think we talked about her a few times, and I'm pretty sure there's a thread on her on our forum where she's been discussed, and some of her work has been, But let me say this: there are some excellent psychics in this world.
For sure.
Your ordinary psychic who's clairvoyant or even somewhat telepathic and can tell you things, foretell things about you in specific, and um, some really good ones. And I've encountered a couple of superior psychics, absolutely superior. And they were just so filled. The two of them were the older ladies at the time. I'm the old lady now, but back then I was a young one, and they were older. But they just had this luminescent glow. Their faces, it's like they were filled with light, and they told me some things that were extremely accurate for my entire life, even up to now. There were things that they were telling me. But yeah, so I don't in any way denigrate psychics. There are people who have powers, to do certain things. Some people are able to effect healings. Some people, to do a lot of different things. And of course, I was really fascinated reading about some of the earlier mediums, the ones that would produce ectoplasmic things.
Yeah.
And or photographs of those things, and to me, I mean, like Eusapia Palladino would lose 15 pounds after a session of producing ectoplasm.
Unreal.
And, and Daniel Dunglass Home. My husband and he's been reading about Daniel Dunglass Home. And he's pretty fascinated with this. And so we talk about it. And I says, well, it partly sounds like poltergeist phenomena, but more than anything, it sounds to me like what he was experiencing was interactions with hyperdimensional, like fourth density beings, and they were behaving in the manner of a trickster.
Mhm.
Because there's other ways, because he's agonizing over how do I explain this with physics? Thinking, I don't think you have to. All you gotta do it. I just add fourth density, and then it's all explained. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question around that, around the Anunnaki. Now, a great mentor of mine, Gerald Clark, who's now dead, who wrote a couple books on the Anunnaki, and Gerald was an amazing, he's kind of like Ark. He had like 37 patents and integrated circuits. He ended up walking away from society. He was living in the jungle in Mexico. His story is insane. What happened to him with his ex, and he had a Down syndrome child, and he wanted to let him live out his life, and his ex, was all into the system and making sure he was attached to the system and all that stuff. Anyway, he lost all of his money that he had made, and he had made a significant amount of money, and he was eventually just living in a like a not a teepee, but just living off the land in Mexico. But he would tell me stories about these beings, and that whatever they were, he was always not speaking in the same ways of densities, but that they were higher realm, beings, and that they had intellects that were 20 to 30 times the smartest third density human, right? And that they could just literally conjure a thought before you thought it. They knew your thought before you thought it. But we would have these conversations. And I know it's an opinion question, and I know the C's have probably answered it many times before, but were the Anunnaki stolen as far as like the actual mythos of this builder race that came here on this planet, whatever, however many long ago, by the quote unquote fourth density reptoids or dracomoids, or were they actually, fourth density giant humanoids? I mean, who were the Anunnaki? Do we really know who they were?
Hold on, I got 9 references. One of the questions on the list is, in many of the Sumerian drawings and literature, the gods, the Anunnaki, are described as eating a plant that grew at the bottom of the ocean, and this plant was the source of eternal life. Answer: nonsense. The source of eternal life is existence. Well, the point was, this is me, that there was some sort of food that these beings ate that was unusual or different, that somehow enhanced their abilities to an extreme degree. Answer: totally false, and you should know it. All so-called special powers come from non-physical sources. Okay, next hit. How did the people of that planet come to Earth? Did they know it was going to be destroyed? And here we're talking about Cantek. You know about Cantek, right?
Cantek, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's where the white race.
Cantekians.
So how did the people of that planet come to Earth? Did they know it was going to be destroyed? Some knew and were taken by Lizzies, and they are the Anunnaki.
Okay. So they, meaning the Cantekians, or the lizards, were the Anunnaki?
I don't know. That's ambiguous. Let's see what the next hit says.
Well, okay, go ahead. Give me the next hit, because this falls in with Shane Bales has said.
Here I ask directly. Who were the Anunnaki? Aliens. Where were they from? Zeta Reticuli. Do they come here every time a comet cluster is approaching to sap soul's energy created by fear and chaos? Yes. Are the two events loosely interrelated? Yes. Is that why they are here now? close. Is there a large fleet of spaceships riding a wave, so to speak, approaching our planet? Yes. Where are these ships from? Zeta Reticuli. When will they arrive? 1 month, 18 years, or longer? How could there be such a vast discrepancy in time? This is such a huge fleet that space-time warping is irregular and difficult to determine as you measure time. Next tip.
So are they humanoid?
Well, if I remember correct, I think that transcript, it goes on to say there's 36 million of them in
Correct.
Yeah, the
ships.
Nephilim. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the Nephilim.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was that was
Who are
different.
the Anunnaki? Aliens. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that means the Anunnaki were Lizzie's.
Yeah,
From
it
the-
has to be.
If you put that together with
So
the,
that's what so there's a guy by the name of Shane Bales, and maybe you're familiar with him, and if you're not, I'm going to send you an email tonight to read his website. But that is mind blowing because he has been saying that the Anunnaki are the reptoids, the Dracomoids, and that they actually impersonated a lot of the information that is found in the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian stuff about the builders, and that because and that's a question I have for you now too. You might as well just answer it, or you can answer it, but because you talk about the fourth density consortium consisting of Dracomoids, Greys, and giant humanoids, would those fourth density consortium humanoids be the builder race from way before the Dracomoids?
well, hold on.
Because you talk about the Celts.
Okay, I've got 108 references to the consortium, so I don't think we want to go through all of that. I remember, it was a large part of it is third density humans that are involved with interacting with their alien overlords, and I would suppose that some of them. I mean, remember what they said about the tall blonde
Yeah,
types. You know that
the Nordics.
the Nordics can be either bad guys or the good guys. That's the only
Right.
thing that are of good guys, that there are any good guys among, is the Nordics. And yeah, so I would say, and you got to be clear on this because they're the Nordics, they're tall, but they're the Anunnaki, which is the lizards. There are the lizards or the lizzies. There are the gray aliens, which are cybergenetic probes. You know, they
Right.
just they grow like plants. And then there's there are a variety of other types. You know, I mean, I've got some kind of little books that I thought was pretty reliable that presented some different types. And the C's say there are some different types. So, but amongst them all, uh, the Nephilim, remember, are third density
Right.
beings. And they are really, what they say, they were 14 feet tall. And
Some taller. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it was a really funny session when we did that.
Well, so interesting enough, there's a lot of remnants of them that have been wiped off by the Smithsonian.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
Michael.
If you read books about giants and
Right.
you see that, and I've got one, and he's got reproduced in there the newspaper articles that were published about these finds.
Yeah.
You know, and then the Smithsonian all of a sudden says, "Oops, no, we don't know anything about it. If it was here, we don't know anything. It disappeared." And yet there are credible eyewitnesses, and that's what I'm always looking for is, credible eyewitnesses, and they're credible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
there was some remnants of that, and it was mostly in the Americas, but there's also been some found in Central Asia and in the Anatolian areas and so forth. So, and of course, along with that, you look for the weird skulls,
Well,
which,
the Serpent Mound in Ohio, I've been to that, and that's like one of the great, amazing, unexplained phenomena / of Ohio or whatever. But there's also a giant meteor crater, in that area, or, in that field, and so a lot of people hypothesize that was probably the Nephilim ship.
Probably not. It was more likely to be a meteoroid or a meteorite.
Yeah.
Or, if it's an actual crater, it would be something that actually hit. When they explode overhead, they make these elongated, areas of ablation.
Mhm.
So and that's the other thing. That's the other big theme that the seas brought out was disasters and cataclysms brought on by cometary bombardment or meteorite bombardment and so forth. So, and it's somehow that's loosely interrelated with, the appearance and, of aliens and their direct interaction with humanity. And they also say that that's somehow interrelated with the wave that the comets, whatever they are this time, riding the wave, that they will arrive in a way that is something, like maybe appearing from fourth density to third. I don't know. That would be pretty scary. But I've done a whole lot of work on cataclysmic disruptions in the past, a lot of research. And so that's things things change. And when you have macrocosmic changes, and even a change in density, it's not going to be, peaceful.
Yeah.
It's going to be chaotic, and it's going to be disruptive and destructive. And and that's the way it's always been. I mean, the world doesn't end.
Right.
It takes a beating.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Would you say too, Laura? This is one question. You've talked about it, but I've wondered: is the weather and these cataclysmic events remnants or reverberations of fourth density, maybe not warfare, but energetic things happening, and it's our attempt to kind of describe them and say what happens? Kind of the same way that, like, if dogs heard a domestic violence dispute next door, they would probably have a different way to describe it than a human would describe, like, oh, my neighbors are fighting. But a dog would say, like, this could be some like meteoric shift or something like that, because I don't know what is next door or who's talking or whatever. So is that what we're witnessing when we see that, or is it just actual nature, random events that happen?
That's a great analogy. I love that. Yeah. And the seas have said that the weather and earth changes are reflections of battles in fourth density.
Yeah.
And that, and sometimes you can even notice it. I mean, you can, we've had a number of meetings where we got together with a bunch of people. We had some plans to do some interesting things, and there would be this sudden violent storms, as though, no, you're not going to do that. We won't let you. And then, there have been floods. And so it's all related. And the fact that there's an increasing number of these things, of floods and earthquakes and of course, war itself. I mean, the ancients had a great idea, because for them, war was a God thing. You and your God, and these people and their God. You were fighting on behalf of the God, and in a way, it's true. I mean, if you know about egregores, people get under the influence of an egregore, and they'll do anything that it drives them to do. I mean, look at the Ukrainians. They've got a horrendous egregore driving them, and so it's just wars, earth changes, all kinds of things. And I want to say something else here that, a lot of people are not happy with me when I say this, but I know that there is spraying going on. They're spraying all kinds of crap on people.
Of course.
You know what? There is something else going on up in the sky that people are not talking about, that they should be, which is the changes in the stratosphere. And I mean extreme icing, extreme cold in the stratosphere, which causes contrails, not chemtrails.
Chemtrails. Yeah.
Chemtrails are lower, because think about it this way. If you're going to drop some kind of chemical on somebody or people, you're going to fly low enough so that it will actually drop on them. If you put it up way in the stratosphere, it'll be halfway around the planet before it comes to ground.
Yeah.
Okay? You can't control where it's falling. And if you want to seed clouds and change the weather, that has to be done in the mesosphere. Okay? So pay attention to where these trails are. Are they in the troposphere, the mesosphere, or the stratosphere? Where are they? And what's going on in the stratosphere is scary as hell, because that's what's telling us that an ice age is coming, because our planet is changing. The atmosphere is changing. And, if an ice age comes, that's all she wrote.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Talking mass starvation and violence against, wars for resources in a very serious and personal way. And the inability of people to be able to produce enough food to support, the planet's population, whatever it might be at the time. So, yeah, pay attention to where they are, because then you'll know whether it's ice in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, or if they're trying to weather manage you, or if they're trying to actually spray chemicals on you and, make you breathe in, crap.
Well, one of the most ground shaking things that Jay and I read in the Wave series was related to HARP and what was actually going on with HARP. And I didn't think about this as a question before, but now that we're talking about it, can you explain how HARP is frequency modulation? Because I think even your conspiracy people would say, oh, HARP is weather manipulation to be able to drum up a hurricane or something like that and put it where they want it. But when we read that about how HARP is frequency modulation, almost, this may be an exaggeration, but almost like a control mechanism of the Matrix. Like if you had an electric fence for the Matrix, like HARP is that fence. Could you explain like why most people that are trying to explain how HARP is weather manipulation is really something completely different?
Well, before you answer that though, I got to say, you can see it right now. This is my opinion personally, but you can see it right now, Laura and Hunter, with just the people that are still wearing masks. That's literally part of the mind control entrainment, because it doesn't take anyone but maybe an 80 IQ nitwit to know that masks are absolutely useless. They've been scientifically proven to be useless. And so if you're still wearing a mask in the general public today, anywhere, regardless of your age or believing in that, you're under some form of perverse mind control where you don't understand reality.
Well, according to the series, it's mind control waves, and they can target, areas, and they can bounce it off,
Right.
the atmosphere and make it come down here or there, and apparently they can produce quite a bit of um, coverage. And the series also said something odd about it, that it was got to be utilized for transfer of perimeters.
Right.
And transfer of perimeters, I didn't know whether they meant that it was to be utilized on behalf of fourth density critters, to help them in their moving around, like literally transferring a chunk of space time from here to here. I mean, is that what they meant? I don't know. But yeah, whenever we start having, all of us in the house, having weird dreams, and we talk about our dreams, and how similar they are. And then we'll post on the forum, okay, we had certain dreams, and then there are people all over the planet, and they post back what their dreams were. And we pay attention to how this happens, because you kind of know that when that sort of thing happens, that heart must be activated, because people are having similar dreams that are about similar things. And what it is they put images and thought. I mean, they can transfer actual words or concepts right directly into your head. And it depends on your nature and your makeup, how this gets unpacked.
Right. Right.
That's why not everybody is exactly the same, because it depends on the individual. Some person may dream about, water skiing, and the other person may dream about drowning. And basically the dream is something about, the information is something about water, or a lot of water, or water doing something. But you notice also the numbers of shootings and acts of violence, and we've tracked that also. I mean, with our forum and with all the people, paying attention. And different ones have their specialties. Some of them pay attention to earthquakes, and some people storms, some people bridge collapses, some people,
Right.
they've all got their little specialties. And what you notice is that these things come in clusters. I mean, lately it's getting to the point where it's almost nonstop. But there for probably the last 20 years that we've been tracking it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And you can almost always say, okay, heart must be activated because whatever program is put into this, and that's something that can happen. People can be taken and programmed a la green bomb.
Right.
And heart can be used to turn it on.
Yeah.
So you've got 1,000 green bomb type people in the population, and they want to activate them. All they got to do is use heart. Boom, they're all turned on,
Right.
and they do whatever it is that they are programmed to do.
Right.
It's I
Well,
don't know.
okay, so think about this.
Be normal thinking this shit.
So think about
This
this
is a
without
profound
Laura.
podcast. Keep going.
Think about this is we know they do that with these shooters or assassins. We know those are more or less, I don't know if they're green bomb necessarily, but they're basically mind controlled. But if people understood what the green bomb method or control or whatever's going on there.
When I use it, I mean the method. It may
Yeah.
not be that particular exact program, but that's the method they use.
Right. Right.
Right. And so, like you said, you take 1,000 people across maybe a whole country, a couple different countries, and they get activated with the same sort of like behavior, weaponized behavior, or whatever it is, and start interacting with people. I don't think it takes that many instances of 1,000 people to interact with 10 or 20 people to where you have these like crazy sort of things happen across the planet all at the same time, which I had never pieced together with the green bomb and the hard power. Like you said, it's like a switch. They can get flipped. You have 1,000 people start to act crazy. Well, that can cause massive sorts of like riots or what war or whatever different thing is going on.
Well, I mean, I think they did it in COVID. If you think about what happened in 2020, like in March, it was released, they shut down society, and then there were the riots in all the cities, remember, in the summer, 3 or 4 months later, and they did all this. But I think, Laura, the bigger question about this, because we could go all day on that topic, is why are some people, like the people in your forum, the people that live with you, the people like Hunter and I, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination egoically stating like we're better or condemning or judging the others, but why are some of us open to receiving this information, somewhat unable to be mind controlled versus so many that are? Is it a higher density consciousness that is what we are, incarnated in physical third density? I mean, or are we, I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm kind of asking you, but like, why is there such a difference in consciousness between people?
I think that there are differences in consciousness. There's a spectrum.
Sure.
And you know this from any kind of study of animals or whatever, that there all kinds of features can appear and disappear, and there's there's some pretty specific genetic language that talks about it, but I don't have it right on my brain fingertips. But the thing is, the seas say that the soul marries with the physical body if the right genetics are present.
Mhm.
And that you have the ability to expand within the parameters of your genetics. And there are souls that are they made a decision to come back at this time. Now, whether they made it from fifth density or from a fourth density existence, I don't really know. Or maybe, there's been suggestions that there are sixth density souls that have come back to help humanity. But then, it would probably be arranged sixth density, fifth density, because there's some that belong to fifth density and the fourth density souls that make a choice. It's like a pact. And they make an agreement to come back to do certain things. Well, of course, once you enter into the body, you have 50-50 chance of whether or not to remember that, or whether you're going to be sidetracked or distracted. And, what's going to happen? Are you going to wake up to what you came here to do? I've spent the last 20, 25 years trying, waking up to what I'm supposed to do. And I guess I've been doing it. And, I hope I've been doing it. I'm getting a little old now. So I guess whatever it is, it's already close to being done. But
well, one of the things in your books that blew my mind, I know I sent this in email, and Hunter and I have talked about this, is when you saw your ex-husband in a trance, one night saying, being scolded by whatever was keeping you, he was part of the forces that were keeping you down. And I mean, my wife now, Monica, we've had this story because I told her about that. She hasn't read the book. She's on the second book, I think, right now, but she had the same thing. Her ex-husband literally used to say, if it's not in the Bible, it's fake, and she had that. She dealt with that for 21 years of her life. And she's like, so much guessing. So anyway, for the people that don't know, I'm talking a little bit about your story and how you were married to somebody that was extremely religious, as many people are.
Yeah. And when I married him, I saw his religious proclivities as a positive thing, because you don't want to have children with somebody who is a flooby. That's a male floozy. And so, yeah, but it just got worse and worse and worse. And I mean, how many times can you be told, that from the book of Proverbs that, a good woman is more priceless than a ruby, and they're rare and all that kind of stuff. And of course,
damn those lizards.
yeah. So, and then of course, when I was pressed on doing what I was gonna do. I mean, I wrote about it in my book, Amazing Grace, how I decided I was gonna buy a house and move my kids into it, and I told him he could stick or go. So, and that's where we started the Cassiopaean Experiment, and the more that happened, the more he passive aggressively tried to just do things. And then there was that weird thing where those critters came in my bedroom that night, and I realized that he was as useless as the rest of the things you can think of. I'm not going to say
tits on a bowl.
Yeah. Yeah. Balls on a priest or tits on a nun.
Well, I swear, Laura, this is what's so insane is my wife had the exact same story. And when I was reading your work, I really empathized with her and yourself because I thought about, she would tell me, she was like, I wanted to leave him, but I just didn't know how. And then I thought about his mother and how much I was so connected to his mother because she was such a nice person. So I know how hard it is when you're a mom and you have that maternal energy and you want to just provide and protect and nurture and nature.
I had 5 children.
Yeah. She had 3 with him, but similar. Right. So it's like, you're like, in a way, like, like your soul, your higher self is telling you that you have to get out, but there's a part of you that's saying, well, I also took this oath. I made this agreement, at marriage, and as a woman, I can fix it. I'm the great creator. I'm the center of creation.
Tried. And I realized at one point that I was going to die. Right.
Literally.
And then my children would be left with him. And then what would happen to them? And I also realized that I was setting a piss poor example for my girls. I mean, if somebody living with somebody like that is like being eaten by a single piranha.
That's true. Nashes and
Death by
nashes
a
and
thousand
nashes.
cuts.
Death
One
by 1,000
at a
cuts.
time, you know? And eventually, you know, you look down and your old buddy's like got all these shredded parts, you know. So I knew that I was going to die if I didn't do something. And he was very unhappy too because, you know, I was doing things he didn't approve of. And I wasn't going to stop doing them because to me it was right. So
But based on what you witnessed in the middle of that night, do you think that's what's going on? That all of these people like him, like my wife's ex-husband, I mean, I could tell you stories about him. He still hasn't, I mean, I won't get into that, but are they under the power and the control of these fourth density beings to take
sure.
away people like us from our job or our destiny?
I mean, think about what happened the night I hypnotized this gal. You know, her name was Pat, but I think I gave her a different name
Yeah.
sorry. But anyhow, that there was a UFO over my house when I had her under hypnosis. That was a special situation, of course. I know that, you know, and that she wasn't able to tell me what happened. Well, you know, she was married to a scientist who worked at Fort Detrick.
There you go. Fort Detrick, man, talk about a place with all sorts of negative
So
stuff going
that
on.
that
God.
that whole thing. No wonder there was a UFO over my house because you know they were probably creating COVID at the time. I think it was created for Detrick. I really
So
do.
how much then relative to that, how much are these people that work in the dark projects? And by the way, that's what I was telling you. Shane Bales is an amazing guy. He wrote a blog called The Ruiner. The Ruiner. Hunter and I are very familiar with his work. He's actually a close friend of mine. He was in the special projects and all of that. And he tells the story about the Dracomoids. I mean, his stuff lines up exactly with your stuff. It's incredible. And I'm friends with him. And this is so crazy and random, but literally he messaged me yesterday on Facebook, which I never go on Facebook anymore, but I went on Facebook because I got a ping and it was him. And he was like, "Hey man, I haven't talked to you in so long. What's going on?" And I was just like, "This is insane." But anyway, he talked about this. How much of the people that are in these, Boeing and, again, the special projects, the dark projects, Aero Force, I mean, aerospace and all of that, how many of these people are aware of these fourth density forces? And then how many of them are actually just under severe, like clockwork oranging mind control, like the astronauts probably were under, and they don't even know that they're actually under their influence?
I'd say probably 83% don't know and 17% do. And in that 17%, there's different levels of need to know.
Right.
So, you know, at the lowest levels, they know a little bit, and then as it gets towards the center, they know more and more and more. So I'd say about 83% are. And come on, you read The Wave, and you read
Yeah.
my
The Seas talk about it. Yeah. Yeah.
about uh, you know, neurochemicals and how people are programmed. And for most people, all you need is that ordinary societal familial programming, and they can control you by putting somebody in proximity to you who
Totally.
triggers your programs. Or, I mean, Eve Lorgan wrote a book about love bites.
Yeah. Love bites.
It's right on the money about that. I mean, she and I don't agree on a lot of things, but she was really right on the money about people getting love bite situations where they get taken, you know, where if they're moving a little too close to something or in a certain direction, they, you know, are not wanted to be going, you know, somebody will be brought in and fall in love, and then that's it. They're
To that point, Laura, I wonder, is there deal brokering going on between, not, we know it's not the United States government, but basically just the one world government and hyperdimensionals for exchange of technology or power or anything like that, where they're saying, hey, if you do this for us in terms of like human interaction, then we're going to give you this. I've just wondered, like, is all the black magic, is all the deal brokering or whatever a way for them to think that a third density service self being becomes a fourth density service of self being, or there's like some payoff or something that they're trying to get from these entities?
well, okay. On one level, there was, as I understand it, and I understand this from several different sources, not just C's, that there was an agreement between certain aliens and the U.S. military or you know, the secret government or the
Whatever they are, the
inter-
cabal.
yeah, whoever. They would. exchanging them certain technology in exchange for permission to be abducting people and using them experimentally and so forth. But of course, they were assured that they would put them back and everything would be fine. And it wasn't too long before the U.S. Side, the government side, discovered that the aliens lied and that they were abducting far more people than they said they would. And they were doing, in some cases, some extreme damage. And there were cases, like I said, of human mutilations, and then there was cattle mutilations going on. And you notice how these cattle mutilations get covered up so fast. I don't know if you read Linda Moulton Howe's books on
Yes.
cattle mutilations. Yeah. And, I sat there and listened to her giving a talk once, and she had just come back from investigating a particular case. And it had all the elements of the hyperdimensional aspects, but she wasn't tuned into that really at that point. She's still thinking in third density terms. And her voice was literally shaking, while she was talking, because she described this incident about this cow being moved, and whatever was moving, it was invisible, lifted it up, dropped it down, whatever. So, yeah, there was an agreement. Now, is there an agreement? Is there a promise on the part of these fourth density beings to the world government, people like Klaus Schwab and all those people? And I would say Klaus Schwab is probably, he's probably in bed with the Lizzies, both literally.
It has to be. What's the other guy? Yuval Harari, where we're all humans.
Harari.
Yeah.
Is there a deal that they are going to be at the top of the food chain when the changeover comes, when the aliens come into when we pass into a fourth density world, assuming that we do, and the aliens are then able to interact with people directly? Are they promised to be at the top of the food chain? And I think that there is some such agreement. I think the Seas have alluded to that and almost even said it directly. The problem is that, everyone knows in any case like that, the aliens will look upon these individuals as traitors to their kind.
Exactly.
And they, nobody will, they'll use a traitor, but they won't ever trust him.
That's what I was thinking. It's the ultimate, as you described to the Seas and you, the ultimate service to self paradigm is that they just continue to eat themselves top down.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen. They don't realize the ultimate outcome of this game. They don't. And think about what's his name? Is it Zuckerberg?
Zuckerberg.
Who's digging
he's building an underground thing in Hawaii right now. Yeah.
In Hawaii, like Hawaii is going to survive. And then they put all of these seeds up in Svalbard, Sweden. Like, we're not going to have an ice age. These people are not being given the truth.
No, they're clueless.
At all. They don't know what's really going on. And they're doing some of the stupidest things I've ever seen people do. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting. The Sea said that when that day comes, it'll be a triple bad day for people like the Rockefellers.
Yeah, all of them. Well, that's another interesting question. How are you doing right now, energy-wise and time and everything? Good?
I'm fine.
Awesome. So that's a fascinating thing, right? So we know that the Seas have told us that there's these undergrounders, and they kind of insinuated in one of your calls that Zuckerberg was one, even though they're not really allowed to tell us that. But obviously, there's been so many pictures of Zuckerberg in the past with his black eyes and these just random images that are like, what is going on? Is he a clone? Is he a replicant? Is he a hybrid? Whatever. So, the undergrounders, let's talk about them, because Hunter and I have always theorized that many of the influencers on planet or topside today don't make sense. They're always negative. They look at other humans that they talk to with these like beady eyes. They never smile. There's never joy or positive mental energy. And we could mention names, but we won't just for now. Are a lot of the influencers, the people with these massive audiences, undergrounders and part of their hybridized species?
Well, there might be some. As Caesar said, there's a lot of them walking around on Earth now. Some of these,
Yes.
but they also said that there is a group underground who call it the Nation of the Third Eye, and it's
Right.
their job, to basically, I don't know how they do it. So I was going to say, oh, they lay down and go into a trance and project their thoughts, but maybe they don't have to lay down and go into a trance. Maybe they are assigned a certain group of people, and it's their job to, pull the levers and push the buttons on those people to control them. And I would say a lot of the influencers are this type of individual.
Right.
There are probably a lot of others that are just simply completely programmed with social and familial programming that includes what's been going on in our universities for the past 20 years, which has produced this crop of absolutely insane people that think that there's more than two genders or more than two. I watched a video not long ago. It says, "Oh, sex assigned at birth." What do you mean sex assigned? You either have a penis or a vagina. You are either a male or a female. And they said, well, there's a spectrum of genders.
Spectrum of genders.
I mean, what has to happen to a person to turn their brain to oatmeal like that? I mean, it's not even oatmeal, it's freaking tapioca.
Well, something happened today, this morning, and Hunter already knows about it. And it was such a powerful conduit of me connecting something that literally, I'm not kidding you, the power in my house went completely out for 7 minutes. I thought it was in the neighborhood. I mean, I was texting Hunter. He knows what it is. I won't get into it, but it was like a very profound revelation to me about that. And all of a sudden, I'm in the middle of doing my cardio on my bike, and my bike went off. And I'm like, what? And then I thought it was maybe a short. And I went out to talk to my wife, who's in the backyard working on our patio. And I said, did the power go out? She's like, I don't know. I'm out here doing the deck. And I'm like, then I'm looking around because it was early this morning and the power's out in my entire house. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm walking out to the circuit breaker. And then as I'm walking out to the circuit breaker, it came back on. It was like literally a short, but it's relevant to what you're talking about. This transgender stuff is a massive psyop from them to teach. It's essentially an attack on masculine energy, just as it is on feminine energy. And it's been on the feminine energy, as you know, way longer time, but it's more recent with the masculine energy because they really do want people to be utterly confused what their role is as a biological organism. It's insane. But as you know, we know why. They tell us. The seas have told us. It's not fun to talk about it. Oh, beautiful. It's not fun to talk about it, but they're literally creating vehicles for them to reincarnate into in both third and fourth density that are insane.
But I don't think that's what they're doing with these transgender people. That's not their purpose. And you gotta understand that they got all of this from their education. So the people who are doing the educating are undoubtedly the ones who are being, mind controlled. Right. I mean, because you can take one person and completely mind control them, and put all this stuff in their head, and then send them out there to be, a teacher, a professor, and they can, corrupt thousands upon thousands of students over a number of years. And then taking over the educational system is undoubtedly a goal. Okay, so as far as undergrounders go, the C's have talked about, the hybrids that they've been creating underground, that they're bi-density, that they can move in. And I think the bi-density ones, and they're pretty smart. So I wouldn't class them with the idiots because they're probably, flying under the radar.
Right. That's what's happening.
And they're just, they may influence other people.
That's what I meant. They're more of influencing, and they're doing it from the shadows.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that, I think. And they may even be, some of them may even be teachers or professors, and they know what they're doing. They don't believe what they're teaching, but they, want to inculcate that into the heads of, all of these, open-minded poor kids that go in there and get these educations. I mean, I swear people should just take their kids out of school.
I was going to just say that to you. Obviously, I have daughters that are 16 and 14, and they already know that I'm not paying. I mean, this is the truth. I mean, I'm very open about this. I'm not paying for them to go to college. If they end up going to college for a specific reason because it's their desire for whatever industry or trade or whatever it is they want to do, that's fine. But they have to get a full scholarship, either athletically or academically. I'm not paying for it. And truthfully, by then, it's because they're still 3 years away. I probably might just overrule it and say you can't.
Yeah.
Because they really are bastions of transhumanism, Luciferianism, Satanism. Yeah.
Because even then I knew that there was something that was really wrong about what they were doing, and it wasn't anywhere near as bad 25 years ago.
Right.
30 years ago, whatever. So, yeah, it's a big mess.
So the thing that's interesting about transhumanism is, to me, it's almost like species engineering in a way. Do you think that has anything to do? This is just rampant speculation with turning humans into almost like a cyborg, kind of like the Greys or like the marching agents for the reptoids or, fourth density beings. Do you think they're doing that to prep for an invasion so that humans are more pliable and controllable to be these like organic slash inorganic like biobots, if that makes
Sure,
sense?
because you can't take people that are fairly normal and send them out to control, their friends and neighbors and family, because at
Right.
some point it's gonna get to them and they're gonna not do it. So what are you gonna do? You create an army of them with implants in their brains or certain drugs that change their DNA, or um, certain drugs that change the way they think, wipe out their memories. They've got drugs that they're working on that are supposed to make you forget so that you don't suffer PTSD from killing people. Swell. I mean, look. So, yeah, I think that I mean, that's part of it, because I don't think that those are the ones that they are exactly, I don't think they're engineering those necessarily for their own entry. And whether it's incarnation or whether they, enter in as a form of possession, um, it could be 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So, uh, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm sorry.
Well, one of the I think this was cited a couple times across different wave books that Jay and I will always go back to is, I forget how it intros, but it was like, I think there was something about Bob Lazar, and then he said 90, or the C said 94% for
Right.
what?
Yeah.
For consumption. And then it was like, as what? And I think it was one of the more disturbing ones that you talked about,
Yeah.
of like humans being used for consumption. And that always, just both Jay and I, it gave us like this pit in our stomach when we would read that, because it seemed so, it calibrated as so true with us, but then it was also so disturbing at the same time.
It's really horrifying. And when you look at it, and consumed how? I don't know if you remember the part where we were talking about, torture and so forth, and how uh, the Native Americans would torture people because they felt that, that they could, that if the person withstood the torture really well, obviously he's a very courageous person, and they could absorb that strength and courage from him, and they may even eat a body part,
Unreal.
to consume that. But when you're talking about the massive amount of child trafficking and, human trafficking, females, whatever, young boys that are being trafficked, and a lot of them are being trafficked for snuff films, and people uh, absorb energy from that. They've been
Right.
trafficked for the production of what they call adrenochrome, and some of them are being consumed. I mean, there are so many cases, and it's so incredibly horrifying and so far out of the range of what normal people think about, talk about, or have been exposed to in their daily lives that it's hard to believe, but it is happening, and it's becoming more out in the open now than it ever has been before. The same way the UFO phenomenon, David Grush and these other various people that are bringing out the fact that this is real. That there have been contacts between, upper echelon military individuals and um, other terrestrial, extraterrestrial, ultra terrestrial, whatever you want to call them, beings, and that it's real. And of course, the minute it starts to come out and something is dripped out to the public, then, the cover up machine just goes into full operation. And, that reminds me, poor Richard Dolan, he was here once a few, some years, maybe 10 years ago. And we had a long talk about it. And I gave him the wave and secret history. And he was reading some of it, and he was just so horrified. He couldn't believe it. He believed that there was a breakaway civilization that was going to make everything right, that they were working behind the scenes and undercover, and they were going to come out and fix everything.
The
And
white hats.
yeah, they were all going to, and it just isn't going to be that way. The C said recently, that it's all happening to wake people up.
Right.
And the question is, how far does it have to go before they wake up? I mean, how much suffering must they endure? Because suffering is what wakes you up. And so far they're enduring quite a bit. So obviously it's got to get a lot worse. And, for the rest of us, who are always, we're saying, all right, already, we know, enough, stop. But we have to endure it too, because those idiots out there are waking up. So it's going to get a lot worse. I mean,
well, how many people are not? Because that brings up a better question: is how many people are actually not capable, from a frequency resonance vibration of waking up?
probably 50%.
Yeah, scary.
They're not capable. Capable. It's an operative term.
Right, because you talk about it in Secret History, which you didn't really talk about it in the Wave, which I thought was kind of fascinating regarding the idea of portals, organic portals.
Yeah, because the C's hadn't talked about organic portals.
Right.
Wave. I wrote the Wave where that came up. And it was while I was writing the Wave that I was starting to experience the whole thing about psychopaths.
Yeah.
It was after the Wave that I did all the research on psychopathy. So there was a lot that came after the Wave. The Wave is the groundwork, but there is, we have not stopped having sessions.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, so that's actually a really good question. So why don't you explain that? I think, it's obviously a difficult thing to talk about, but you talked about in Secret History, that literally, and this goes way back, before the fall / after the flood or whatever. There have been many floods. I think they said there have been, but where there's essentially sold beings and unsold or non-sold beings. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, yeah. In fact, I was reading something about it today. Let me find the right word that he was using for this. It was kind of entertaining. Let me change glasses so I can see what I'm reading. Meaning zombies. So what he says is, why didn't we evolve as meaning zombies? Natural selection has no interest in the quality of your inner life. We cannot explain in evolutionary terms why we are not meaning zombies. And what a meaning zombie is, they have conscious experience, but this is restricted to meaningless sensations. A meaning zombie has no experiential understanding of the world. And then he goes on to say that it's thought that An infant's consciousness consists of perceptions of meaningless colors, shapes, and physical sensations. As the infant develops, its meaningless experiences gradually acquire meaning. But a meaning zombie grows up and develops normal behavior and information processing in the brain. Its experiences do not acquire meaning. A meaning zombie has functional understanding, but it has no experiential understanding. Then he compares these meaning zombies, which apparently zombie is a technical term among philosophers, but they use it as a thought experiment because he says, of course, I don't really think that these exist. But the meaning zombie is compared to AI. I mean, look at the computer that defeated Gary Kasparov in chess. Now, this thing it obviously knows chess. It knows, how to play, but it doesn't understand the meaning of anything. And you look at Grok on Twitter, it's an interesting AI. I mean, far more interesting than that stupid thing they came up with Google.
Chat GTP, whatever the hell it is. Oh, you're talking about the new Google one, yeah.
The one that made like black Vikings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, obviously they do not understand meaning. And so basically what this guy, Philip Goff, has described as a meaning zombie is what the series described as organic portals. And basically they are individuals who are evolutionarily stable, but they don't have individuated souls.
Right.
And then you think about what the series said about Neanderthals. They said, okay, Neanderthals were there. And then souls went into them or inserted themselves in them and changed the Neanderthal genes by their presence. And so it might be something similar because organic portals, and the series have said that organic portals, when they're defective, they can be psychopaths. So, it's a difficult concept. And of course, they've said that about 50% of the population is organic portals, that they are not fully souled beings. So that's what we're dealing with. And obviously, these organic portals could be nurtured and cared for and taught properly and exampled for in a very positive way, which would increase their potential for evolving their genetics so that they could, or their children could, embody souls. But that's not what's happening. They're being, I would say, a whole bunch of these so-called transgenders are simply organic portals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes the most sense because they're so utterly confused. They don't feel a sense of feminine or masculine energy. They're confused. But I will say this from a scientific process, a lot of people don't know this, but when they do the reverse sex change or chop their things off, do you realize they can't even have an orgasm after they do that? So can you imagine?
It's like they have lost any potential whatsoever for growth.
Right.
I mean, I'm telling you, there's a lot more to sex than people think there is. I mean,
Yes.
if it's the wrong kind of sex, it's feeding fourth density SDS, because they're putting people out there to be players, one night stands,
Right.
with 50 men, over a period of however many years, and one man, a different woman every night or whatever. And they don't realize that, when you're having sex, there's electrical energy that's forming into a vortex at different, points on your anatomy, probably your chakra points or something. And there's an exchange of energies. And so a guy goes and he has sex with one woman this night. The next night he goes and has sex with another woman. And he's still carrying the energies of that previous woman. And he's exchanging energies with the next woman. And some of those energies include the energies of the previous woman. And the same thing with women. They have sex with one guy and they've got energies that they've exchanged with him. So they got some of his energies in them. And then they go have sex with another man. And then, so it's just, and it destroys their health and it destroys their minds.
Well, if
And
you want to take it deeper, and again, I'm not castigating people who are homosexual, but think of men who could have 12 partners in one night.
is that possible?
Yes.
I mean, I know
Yeah.
women can have multiple orgasms, but
No, a man, I mean, they've done experiments with rats. It just has to be different DNA. But I mean, no, like, in the gay community, there's like one who's the giver and one who's the taker. So with drugs and everything else, no, but I mean, honestly, this is like insane to think about what you're talking about, because you're just talking about it as in a male female role. But if you get down into the whole aspect of gay men, it gets even insaner because of the energy transfer.
yeah. And the thing is most gay men, when they're searching for a partner, they want a man who is, a man.
Right.
We want
Exactly.
we want to take a man who is a man and basically heterosexual and convert him, because that's
Unbelievable.
their ideal. I don't know
Right.
if you read Harvey Cleckley's
I have.
caricature of love.
Yes.
So
Totally insane.
yeah, so and people don't realize that properly undertaken, the sex can be a very beneficial thing. I think you were weren't you talking about that on your other video
Yeah.
that I watched? And people were talking about retention. Gurdjieff have talked about sex to some extent, but not in any kind of graphic terms. But yeah, he said that there are some people who should have more sex, some
Right.
people who shouldn't have sex at all, some people who should have sex in certain ways, whatever. And as far as he was concerned, it wasn't how you had sex. If you had kinks or whatever, that's irrelevant. What was important was that you didn't misuse the energy, that you didn't try to use it, for emotional reasons or, intellect, or let it usurp your intellect. And so, yeah, if you know about sexual energy, and I think most men need a discharge because it keeps the prostate clean.
That's correct.
And
That's absolutely correct. But it's supposed to be coitus. It's not supposed to be masturbation. Not to say that they probably can't
of course,
exchange between the two.
you
Yeah.
understand that when you have intercourse, there's an exchange of electrical energies.
Right.
There's some anatomical things about it that, uh, yeah, like what a man has on the underside of his penis, and then what a woman has, with the so-called G spot, whatever. And women ejaculate.
Right.
A lot of people don't know that, but they do, and they can. And women can have multiple orgasms in one session, and usually when a woman has orgasm, the man is absorbing energy from her. He's absorbing creative energy. And
Right.
it's done properly. When he's done, if he finally finishes, he will not be tired.
That's right.
It's when if you feel at the end that you're just, then you haven't been doing it right.
Right.
Or something,
That's right.
something's going on.
Because there wasn't an exchange of the energy which synced up between the man and the woman. It was like one person using that
Yeah.
other person for
Robbing.
Yeah.
their energy.
Yeah, and if a man is interested enough that he wants a woman to have, 5 or 6 orgasms before he decides that it's time for him, then it's usually a fair exchange.
Totally true.
That's what
Totally true. It's amazing how little people understand about sex. And that was one of the good things I thought about the Barbara Marciniak books. If we can transition to that before we end this show today and move to the next one, is that she talked a lot about the aspect of creative energy and the power. She likened it to like nuclear, anti-gravity. I mean, the energy release and transformation from sex. And again, if we really truly do understand like the divine masculine and the divine feminine, the equal but opposite energetic poles, there is a reception and a union from both fields. And so like when they're used correctly, the energy is like, I mean, it's divine. It's creation force energy.
Yeah, but it's mostly focused and centered in on what is happening in the individual.
Right.
We got to be careful about the create your own reality thing, but we'll talk about that the next time, because that's a whole can of worms, and I really
Yeah,
learned.
you taught me a lot about that. Hunter and I learned a lot from you in that, because we were really caught up in the new age, because Neville Goddard says, envision your life as the wish fulfilled. But, if you're coming from a really, really bad frequency, resonance, and vibration, it's difficult to create a resonant reality. But yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Well, we're 2 hours in. Go ahead. What'd you say?
I said, I'll tell you some stories when we talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Hunter, do you have anything else you want to ask her real quick that's relevant to what we're talking about?
I think that's it for today. I know we're going to do some more. I have a lot around the Christianity stuff, just from my own background and having read that book and kind of revisit a few times. So I'm sure we'll talk about this, but this was amazing. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and my mind is blown. I know other people will be too. So thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah, Laura, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I can't wait to talk about religion. I've always said that religion has been the great opiate of the masses, and it truly is the mass. It's the main mind control lever.
But it can also be the main binder. What does the word religion mean? Religar. To join together. If it's done right, it joins people together.
You're right.
So
100%.
Unfortunately, lizards control our religions, so we don't have opportunity.
Yes, they do. And when you tell people that, man, it's so difficult. All right, well, we'll end the show. So guys and gals, thank you guys so much for watching this. This is part 1. We will be back with part 2 very soon.